All right, so welcome to this month's Dochartaigh Clann Association class that we have going on, and just a couple of things going on. We are recording this class. It will be uploaded to the Dochartaigh Clann Association YouTube channel, and I will send the link out to everybody that registered for the class, but the YouTube channel is available to everyone to look at. We have just over 100 people that have subscribed, and we would love it if all of you would subscribe to the channel. It helps support the clan, and ultimately, if we get a certain number of subscribers, we actually start earning some money from whatever YouTube does with their ads and stuff. So whatever we get that way would go along with the other funds we get from the clothing that we have available through the nonprofit and other things like that. We're just looking for sources to help fund what we're trying to do. The biggest thing that we have been funding and trying to work on is our atDNA project. And I'm going to introduce our two speakers, and Dr. Zack can talk a little bit about our atDNA project as well. But I do want to recognize Bob Daugherty. He was one of the original people on the project, and we're excited to have. He's listed as Robert Daugherty on this call, but I'm excited
Glad to be
Bob,
here.
Yeah, glad to have you with us for sure. So we're going to be talking about autosomal DNA today, and Zack and Mike, I'll turn the time over to you guys.
Okay. Thank you, Eva. So I'm Zack Daugherty. I've presented once or twice before, some about atDNA. I joined the Daugherty atDNA surname project at Family Tree DNA in 2016, 2017, when I first even learned about atDNA. And Robert Daugherty here was an admin, and I was keenly interested, and was constantly pitching ideas and talking and corresponding with him. And he's like, "Oh, do you want to co-admin?" I'm like, "Sure." So I kind of took over doing a lot of admin duties, helping people interpret the
You're doing
results.
a great job, Zack.
Thank you. And anyways, that's not my professional career. My professional career was marine sciences. Recently, though, I'm working professionally as a business intelligence analyst for a casino company. So I'm kind of transitioning to different things just to pay the bills. But yeah, I'm going to go over and talk on basically the autosomal DNA. It's going to be a real basic overview. I don't know if you want to introduce yourself now, Mike, or later. When you...
Sure, I can do a quick intro now.
Okay.
So my name is Dr. Michael Lacopo. That is not Daugherty, and it's not Irish either, but my maternal side is my Daugherty side. So my maternal grandfather was a Daugherty. So I do belong here. I am a doctor of veterinary medicine, have been practicing medicine since 1991, semi-retired now. I've been researching, doing genealogical research since 1980. And have been doing it professionally since 2004. I speak internationally and do have certain areas of specialty, and DNA is one of them. So although I don't do anything with the Daugherty DNA project, I do pester Zack on a regular basis about the atDNA project. So, but I love the power of DNA for helping us further our research and understand our ancestry. So Zack is gonna take the lead on today's presentation. I have a few slides to follow up, but because we all probably come from different skill sets, we're gonna have a lot of Q&A afterwards. So I'll let Zack take it from here.
Okay, let me just share my screen.
There.
You're seeing just the slide, right?
Yep.
And there's this one annoying thing I need to move, whatever that is.
But the other
Okay.
annoying thing is gone.
Yep, I see that. Okay, So again, this will be just a very rough overview. Some of you guys might already be very versed in testing, or some of you might have not even ever tested. One thing I don't plan to cover is ethnicity admixtures. I know that's usually what gets people into the game. I'll be honest, in 2016 when I took my first test, it's sort of what piqued my interest a little bit. It was just like, oh, sure, let's see what the pie chart is for me, and it really wasn't that interesting. but once I started seeing all these DNA matches, I was just like, how do these people fit in? I don't know who this is. And that's sort of what kickstarted for me getting into genealogy to do the groundwork to figure out how these people really do connect. So this will just be a broad overview of those tests and a little bit about the drawbacks and so forth with them. So with that, this overview, we're going to look at what is an autosomal DNA test for genetic genealogy purposes, how it can connect you to living relatives, and what it can and cannot tell you, because there are, again, caveats to these that you need to be careful when you're interpreting these tests. So moving into what is autosomal DNA testing, autosomes of DNA, we all have 22 pairs of non-sex chromosomes called the autosomes. What these are, and you can see here is a graphical representation, is different chromosomes that we inherit from both parents. So we will inherit a chromosome 1 pair from both parents, chromosome 2, and so forth. The sex chromosomes are some that we've discussed in past presentations, like the Y chromosome. That's got a unique inheritance pattern where it only goes father to son, father to son. So we inherit these from both parents, but it also goes through a shuffling, which is called genetic recombination. I won't get too specific with that, but here is like a very simple overview of what that is. Imagine you're getting a chromosome 1 from your father and then 1 from your mother. And with the recombination, it ends up mixing to where each individual strand of your chromosome 1 will get shuffled in a way. So, but still, you're receiving approximately 50% from your mother and 50% from your father each time. So, autosomal DNA, its inheritance pattern is you inherited it from all lines of ancestry. So, with that, you could see what that would entail. It starts to get very convoluted when you start to approach those generational distances of great-grandparents to second, third, fourth, fifth. So with that, you do inherit DNA, but to a certain point. There is limits on what an ancestor could maybe potentially pass DNA down to you. That's usually a difficult limit to know. It's not predictable when you get that high, but there are certain guidelines for at least closer generational distances to ourselves. The autosomal tests are provided by a bunch of companies you've probably heard advertised over the years. With that, the one that I particularly have invested a lot of my time and resources into is Ancestry DNA. And the chief reason among that, or for that, I should say, is because of its database size, really. It offers the largest pool of testers to match with. So with that, it's like fishing in an ocean versus fishing in a pond. You're going to catch a lot more interesting and potentially big catches in the ocean versus that pond, for example. So it has, as of this year, approximately 27 or more million testers. And that test will often go on sale and come as low as $39, but sometimes it's up to $99. It's a saliva vial, so it's one of the more, I think, kind of gross ones to do, is where you're just constantly filling it up with through a little funnel. But the reason I often will test most of my targeted testers there is because it doesn't offer uploads. So you can't test at another company, download the raw data, which is really just a small text file, and upload it to that database. They don't offer that. It's probably for legality and security reasons. It's just easier to say no. And with that is the next company, 23andMe, that also doesn't offer uploads. Its database size is 12 to 14 million, and prices will vary. 99 for the normal test, the 199 is for like the health and traits and so forth. MyHeritage also, unfortunately, very recently doesn't allow uploads. They haven't really said why that I could find or track down a reason why. But that's unfortunate because they did offer free uploads and periods of where you could upload for free and unlock all the tools, or pay a small nominal fee to unlock those tools. But yeah, unfortunately, they shut that off, and they do have some pretty good tools, but it's, again, the third largest. The next is Family Tree DNA, and that's the one that our YDNA project is based on. They offer a family finder test, but their database is much smaller. However, they do offer free uploads, so it never hurts to like test an ancestry and upload to there. However, if you're going to add an additional YDNA or mitochondrial DNA test, you will end up having to pay for them to ship you a kit. And it's a cheek swab, and then you send it back if you want to add that additional layer of DNA testing. Living DNA, I don't have a lot of experience with. I did upload my kits to them, but I haven't looked at them for like 2 years or more. So I can't speak too much on that, but I know it's mostly kind of UK focused, supposedly, or British Isles focused. So it's possible that there could be some interesting fish to fish for in that pond, but I can't really speak to how good it is in terms of helping me with my research, because I haven't used it. So how autosomal DNA is inherited. Again, it comes from all the lines, and we do receive 50% from each parent. With that, we receive an average of 25% from each grandparent. But according to some data through 23andMe, that range starts to get interesting. Again, it's always a good 50-50 from the parent, but at the grandparent level, that average of 25 could actually be a range of 17 to 34%. And you can see where this is going when you start stepping up again another generation. So great grandparents, it's supposed to be an average of 12.5%, but it can range from 8 to 22%. So you could start to imagine when we're wanting to focus on our brick wall ancestors in, let's say, the 18th century or the 17th century, we could quickly run out of a railroad track very fast on having even the potential of inheriting DNA from an ancestor that far back, and having the fortune of another tester inheriting that same bit of DNA from that same ancestor. So you could even see them as a match. And going back to what I, again, was discussing, the recombination shuffle, so that's sort of why we get those ranges about that mean. How our shared DNA connects us to relatives. Basically, the more DNA shared, the closer the relationship. That's a very broad simplification, but that's essentially what we're doing with these tests, is looking for those closest matches and attributing what relationships they could be. And generally, the more DNA you share, the easier, to some degree, determining that relationship is. These are typically measured in centromorgans. I won't really go into the scientific description of that, but it's just more or less a tape measure comparing how related you are with these genotype array tests that we're discussing. And these centromorgan ranges, depending on relationships, can have overlap when you start to get beyond your parents or your siblings. Here is an example of what's called the Shared Centromorgan Project by Dr. Blaine Bettinger. It's sort of a crowdsourced for the information or the data that's provided on people supplying him information of like, here's my matches, or here's how many centromorgans each of my cousins match. I've never actually contributed any data to it, so so I could understand that there might be some people that might have, let's say, a first cousin match, and they say, I match this amount of Centimorgans, but they don't really know that that first cousin could also share another line with them if, you know, if they don't know the genealogy between the two that well. So they could end up being double cousins or something. However, it's got so much data provided to it that it usually comes to down to somewhat reliable averages for the amount of related relationship that you could have with these autosomal tests. But you'll see a lot of cases where some of these ranges will overlap, and I'll show that in a little bit, actually. With the autosomal relationships, we have, excuse me, we have different ranges of centimorgans that will match, which that last slide was showing in detail. But again, a parent-child will share 50%, and most testing companies, I'll show up as this 3,400. Full siblings will share 50%, but it could be a range because they will inherit a different 50-50 mix from our parents than we do. So that range will be 2,500 to 3,400. Grandparents, roughly 1,700. But there are a lot of other relationships that could start coming into play. Aunts, uncles, and stuff can almost approach these numbers. First cousins, we end up sharing 12 and a half. And then by the time we get all the way down to fifth cousins, and this is where we want to start getting into, you know, the interesting matches to try to break some brick walls, you could see that it really drops off the map at sharing roughly 0.05% DNA. And when we get to these levels, we have to be careful because sometimes they could be almost false positives because you're comparing a human to a human, or it's some broad, deep ancestral population that you're sharing in common with, and not so much a particular recent ancestor. So DNA match lists and tools, these are the main bread and butter for our tests that we take with these companies. Again, I'm going to mostly kind of focus on Ancestry because that's where I've pulled a lot of my resources into, or poured a lot of my resources into, I should say. So all these testing companies will more or less provide a list of genetic relatives. And again, when I took my first test in 2016, whether it was for ethnicity or whatever piqued my interest at that time, when I had this big, broad barrage or list of matches, and I'm like, who are these people? I really didn't know who a lot of them were because I didn't have close relatives tested. They were probably like at the closest second cousins, third cousins, and I don't really know a lot of my second or third cousins, to be honest. So I wanted to delve into that, and that's usually what that first list or the main component that I find important for these type of tests are those matching lists. And they're typically sorted from the closest match to the most distant. So the closest relationship, excuse me, I'm getting over a cold this week. The closest match will be the closest relationship, and that's usually at the top of the list by default. Tools that some of these companies have, and another good reason I like Ancestry is because you could build a family tree on it. So that's one tool it has. And they do have some features where you could connect your DNA test to your tree. And if other people have connected it to their tree, it will try to triangulate possible common ancestors of how you're sharing that DNA, which you need to be careful of interpreting as being gospel, because it often will have some errors in it, but it's still a very helpful tool, which is called through lines. But with that, you could do shared matches or view shared matches on these these testing companies, and that helps you build what's called a genetic cluster, where you're matching them, they match these people, and then you could start to parse out how these matches are all interlinking together and see how that works with your family tree. Chromosome browsers, that's unfortunately, I won't get into that. That's a little bit more technical. That's just basically matching certain segments on certain chromosomes between people, and Ancestry doesn't have that. Some companies do. I think MyHeritage does. But yeah, that's a bit beyond the scope of this talk. So interpreting shared DNA, there are challenges with understanding these overlaps. Earlier, I was mentioning how that centimorgan range, when you start to have more distant relationships, will overlap with what could be different true relationships to yourself. So an example of 1,700 centimorgans could be a grandparent, an aunt and uncle, or a half sibling. Actually, it's even more than that. If you had children, let's say, or whatnot, but you didn't know anything past that, or if they had children, 1,700 range would fall in a grandparent, an aunt and uncle, a half sibling, a niece or nephew, or a grandchild. So that's just possibilities around you on a match being reported at 1,700 centimorgans. Now, naturally, you're going to know, like, well, I'm 12 years old and it can't be a grandchild or a niece or a nephew. Well, I guess it could be, but that'd be an interesting family dynamic. But aunts, uncles, grandparents, half siblings, all are possibilities in that range. So that's something to be mindful of with when it comes to these centimorgan ranges and trying to interpret how close they might be related to you. That's where we need to pull in genealogical context. So you building a family tree for yourself, and if you need to, for your match, if possible. So when we do match DNA, it's not, and let's say that these companies will give you a possible relationship. That's not proof of a relationship. Shared DNA proves that you're related if it's a decently high number of centimorgans, but it doesn't always tell you the exact relationship, as we just shown earlier. The same amount of DNA can point to multiple relationships. For instance, sharing about 200 centimorgans means you might be second cousins once removed, third cousins, or even something more distant, depending on the paths, the inheritance paths that DNA went down to get to both you and your match. Because that recombination is random, relatives can inherit more or less DNA than average. So the actual numbers of overlap a lot from one relationship to another. With that, we could also have things like pedigree collapse and endogamy, which I'll mention further what those are and show you an example of a pedigree collapse, for example, in my family tree. That will, if you do have those or a lot of those, it will exaggerate closeness. In other words, someone that shows up as a first cousin might actually be a second or third cousin, but because of some pedigree collapse shared between you and them, it might end up showing up closer. So that's why you might get that first cousin, that higher centimorgan range. That's why it's always important for us to go back to our genealogy to help validate some of these potential relationships. So here's an example of at Ancestry, just the first 4 or so matches for a great aunt of mine. So my Daugherty grandfather, he passed away in 2017 before I could test him, unfortunately, but he had his sister living at the time who's since passed that I was fortunate enough to test. Once I discovered how important it is to try to test the older generations. Everyone usually goes out and buys a test for themselves generally, but if you're really wanting to harness this DNA and using it for your genetic genealogy research, you want to try to target test your oldest living relatives, because they're going to contain the most amount of DNA of those more distant ancestors you're wanting to research. So with my my great aunt who passed, you could see a niece here at the top, and that is a valid niece. I confirmed it obviously through immediate family knowledge. And then the next is my father, who's a nephew to her. And then another niece, which is my aunt. And then you could see myself here, which is a grandnephew. So it did choose the right relationship, but you don't see it. But my brother and sister end up actually having 1,100 centimorgans shared with my great aunt. So they ended up sharing a lot more DNA with her than I did. I just went in and hid them so you could at least see where I was at. But if you click on one of these relationships that Ancestry says in this match view, it will pop up with something where it'll a bit more detail on like how many segments you share, centimorgans, longest segment. That's not important. Those can be when you're getting into endogamy research, but I won't discuss that type of research today. It's a bit beyond an introductory autosomal overview. But you'll see like predicted relationships. It's going to say 732 centimorgans, where if you remember back from that chart I showed you, that could be a lot of possibilities. But it went ahead and determined that it's likely a grand nephew or a half nephew or a half grandnephew or first cousin once removed. And I don't have the full image here, but it was 78% chance that it's one of those relationships. And again, knowing my relationship to her, it's grandnephew. So she's my great aunt. So there are limits to these autosomal DNA tests. They work best for about 5 to 7 generations back. And that's, again, because of that genetic recombination. You remember when I said that on average we'll share or inherit, I should say, 25% from our 4 grandparents, but that range will go from 17 to 34. And then at the great-grandparent level, which we have 8 of those, you end up having a range of down to 8% possibility or 8% DNA from one of those great-grandparents. And as we go further back, that really starts to dwindle down to where it becomes real difficult. So to go further back with reliably making matches through certain ancestors. So that's why we say the reliability is good for 5 to 7 generations back. And what we mean by that is like it's more easy to research and interpret matches that fall within that range. We do, of course, inherit and produce matches, inherit DNA and produce matches from ancestors further back than that. But that's where I want to caution people on doing confirmation bias and so forth. So some ancestors, as we go further back, will contribute no detectable DNA. These autosomal tests that we're taking with these companies, they're looking at approximately 0.02% of our whole genome. Now that 0.02% is an important amount or sections of our genome that the scientific community determined help determine relatedness. But otherwise, again, us being humans, we're so closely related that most of our genome is relatively the same. But when we are looking with these genotype array tests from these testing companies, it's good for, again, that 5 to 7 generation back range. So with that, we want to be careful of the false positives, and that could be contributed by things like endogamy. And endogamy is essentially where a population has interbred closely through families for a long period of time. You can imagine it as being pedigree collapse, but on steroids, where it's happened in a population, isolated population for a long period of time. So we also have false positives contributed by pileup regions. And again, that's because we're all Homo sapiens, or we're all from a Eastern or Western European or what have you, where we're from these deep-rooted populations. So some of these segments will start to what's sometimes called pile up regions, where we'll see a lot of matches, but those are usually very small centimorgan matches, and something that we should avoid over interpreting without a lot of other additional evidence. So the other term is identical by state. So that's again sort of more or less goes in hand with the pile up regions, us being humans and sharing a lot of this our same DNA, so to speak. What the testing companies do when they target that 0.02% of our genome on those tests we take, it's usually targeting identical by descent. So the parts that really differentiate us because of genetic inheritance. So autosomal DNA is powerful, but it's not infinite. We must use it with our careful genetic or genealogy research as we go along with interpreting these tests. What I mentioned earlier about pedigree collapse is here is a second great-grandmother to me, and you could see here where her father and her mother were related, which I think they were first cousins once removed, if I'm interpreting this correctly. But you could see where her father's paternal grandparents were the separate case in Lydia Hendrickson. And you could see her mother's maternal great-grandmother was, her parents was also the same separate case in Lydia Hendrickson. So because of that, she ended up getting a little bit extra DNA because of those two connections. And you need to be careful with interpreting that when you're researching these ancestors or other ancestors, because that will conflate or sort of show a closer relationship if other people descend from those same people as well, from this woman as well. Another thing on when we look at interpreting some of our DNA match lists is this is a look at Family Tree DNA's Family Finder matches. And I typed in here Daugherty on my father's kit. This is looking from the perspective of my father's kit right now. And the first match up above there, it just sorted, it didn't sort by centimorgans. It's just sorted by, for whatever reason, when I typed in Daugherty, it kind of reshuffled everything. But it will show his grandson there, my nephew, and it will show me and my brother here. And you can see our centimorgan match ranges with our father. Then it showed this other Daugherty here, who I blurred out. And he has done a Y-DNA test, and it shows that this little father figure here, this blue symbol, means that it's on his paternal side. So it's through my dad's dad. So it's just like, oh, wow, interesting. Then, and this person done a Y-DNA test. Maybe, you know, we're sharing the same Daugherty ancestor, and that's also where the autosomal DNA is coming from. Well, when I actually look at this tester's happened to have a known Daugherty cousin who did a big Y test, I was able to determine that our most recent Daugherty common ancestor through our father's line was 1150 AD or CE. So it's very unlikely that the autosomal DNA that we're sharing, that this man is sharing with my father at 19 centimorgans, is coming through that father's line. And with a little bit more research, looking at shared matches, doing some genealogy work with and determining his family tree, comparing it to mine, there is no relation, at least anywhere within our brick wall ancestors, for example. So this autosomal DNA that's being shared is either something that's more ancient, like one of those things where I said we need to be careful of interpreting smaller centimorgans, or it's through some other ancestral line that is through my father's father, but we just can't determine where that is. But it's not through the patrilineal line. So with that, we want to be careful of what's called confirmation bias in DNA research. So that's when we we see things we expect, but not what the evidence shows. So we'll latch on to something we see. We're just like, oh, that I've got this Doherty match, and they have to surely be matching me through that, so maybe I could just piggyback on their family tree and see where it goes from there. We want to be careful with just being sold on that with conviction. We want to follow up with other careful research and evidence to support that or refute that claim. Small matches. So I tend to not dwell too much on matches where the segments are 20 centimorgans or less. There are true ones, and I have obviously validated some below that, but it's better to work with the largest matches, those at the top of the list, and carefully work through and attribute them to your tree and so forth. And we start to build those genetic networks, then it's a good platform to jump off of to work on these smaller centimorgan matches. There's a risk of forcing matches to fit our family tree. It could just lead you astray on being biased with selecting that, and it could just cause issues for you down the road. So you just want to carefully take your time, work on the genealogy side of things to attribute those matches, and really get a good handle on how you're sharing DNA with this person and the shared matches between you. So that's why we should always rely on a bunch of independent matches and our genealogical records and family trees, both with our matches and our own trees as well. So something that I find kind of interesting is going back to, I mentioned that there's a tool that Ancestry has called Throughline. It's where you could build your family tree. You could attach DNA testers to themselves in your family tree. So I've done that for myself. I've attached a DNA test to my profile in my family tree. I did it for my father, who's tested, and attached it. And it will take what I know about my family tree and try to research view other people's family trees that have done the same thing at Ancestry. And it will try to find common ancestors. And it will make assumptions on whether or not you're connected through those certain ancestors. We need to be careful, again, of taking this at full value because it can lead you astray as well. I'm not going to show any examples of that, but what I'm wanting to show is how much these matches will drop off when you start to look at the generational distances to a common ancestor. So starting with myself, looking at my supposed immigrant ancestor and brick wall ancestor, Charles Daugherty, who's fifth great grandfather, so 7 generations removed. You could see I generate 61 DNA matches through him. Now, most of those are coming through my 4th great grandfather, 47 of them. But you could see here that we have 6 through one of his other sons. That's 6 people that I'm matching that it was able to determine through lines. 3 through the daughter that Charles Daugherty had, and 5 through the youngest son. But so these are the ones, these matches are the ones that I'd be interested in trying to determine, are they truly descended from that ancestor? Am I sharing DNA to them that is representing this Charles Daugherty or not? And again, that comes down to careful genealogy research. Now, if we step back and we're looking at my father's test to his 4th great grandfather, so that same Charles Daugherty, you see it jumps up to 74 matches. Oddly enough, I had a 3 here and my father has a 2. I think that's because Ancestry switched their tests between 2016 and 2017 to a different chip. This is called version 1 and version 2. Version 2, they put more health traits and so forth into it. So I think I end up having that extra match probably because I'm on the version 1 kit. My father's on a version 2. Regardless, it's pretty much about the same, 5, 2, and 5. So my father really didn't gain a huge amount of ground on matches through this brick wall ancestor, but he does have a lot more. I had 47 on my fourth great grandfather, and he has 62 on who's his third great grandfather. Moving on the generational drop off, if we go back to my great aunt who I tested, and this shows the importance of testing the eldest living relatives you can, you could see a huge increase in the amount of matches through these tertiary or siblings, I should say, to my fourth great grandfather or second great grandfather for my great aunt here. So it jumps up from what was 5.25 to 14.13.3. Actually, this one went down a bit, and that's just because, again, my great aunt didn't inherit the same DNA from her parents that my grandfather did. And I couldn't test my grandfather to get this view, but that's what causes that mix. Regardless, she jumps up quite a bit to 105 matches. Now, the next one, a little background on the next match that I'll show. This George Daugherty here, he was married 4 times. So the 3 wives that he had, his first 3 wives, all passed away, and he remarried. And the third and fourth wife, actually, they were also widows with families. So he ended up having some kids with both of those women. Surprisingly, with the fourth woman, he had a child when he was 77, shortly before he died. I didn't believe it. I was just like, this can't be. But all the documentation, the birth records for that daughter that he had with that fourth wife, everything said he was the father, all the oral history, and even the DNA matches through her does show it to be true. So I was blown away by that, but those people descended from that daughter of his when he's 77. They're kind of a generation out of time. They're like me being able to test my great grandfather. And with that, that's the view that this individual provides. Unfortunately, this tester passed away a couple years ago, but I was very fortunate to get her and 2 others tested that are at the same generational level as her. It's like, again, being able to test my great grandparents, which is very helpful. And you could see how much the matches jump up. So 145 through that brick wall ancestor. And it went from, let's see, my aunt was 14.13.3, 19.19.6. So quite a bit more matches. And that helps with finding potential relatives that could help break down this brick wall. So this is why it's always important to try to find and target test these oldest living relatives that are the closest generational distance or shortest generational distance to the ancestor that you want to research. So with a lot of this, you want to always, I can't stress this enough, integrate DNA with other evidence. So you want to always be mindful of careful genealogical research, so documentation of like censuses, parish land, vital records, and so forth. So careful genealogical research must be first and foremost before you really try to use or leverage these tests with attributing certain genealogies to them and yourself. Also, other tests that we discussed, so yDNA and mitochondrial DNA, can help supplement some of these autosomal tests. For example, if you're matching someone that is a small centimorgan and it's showing that you're a match through a multiple times great grandmother, and that great grandmother multiple times over is a matrilineal ancestor, so your mother's mother's mother ancestor. Same for that match of yours. Well, actually, you'd be able to help support that or refute it by both doing a mitochondrial test. because you should be almost an exact match or a very, very, very close match because mitochondria doesn't change much through time. Same thing with Y-DNA. You see a Daugherty and you're a Daugherty and you're thinking, oh, we share this same patrilineal ancestor. And we have 8 centimorgans matched on the autosomal DNA. But, you know, our genealogies are a little wishy-washy. Like, say that same patrilineal ancestor is all the way back in the 1600s. Well, I would want to go out and try to validate that by adding an additional layer with Y-DNA tests, because that's a perfect way of leveraging or overlaying that types of DNA tests to see whether or not it really is the case that you're sharing that common ancestor, or whether or not the genealogies are a bit too fuzzy and need more further research to really parse out. It's also good about testing oral histories. Some of us are only left with oral histories. I've been able to refute. I've never, very rarely have I actually supported many of my oral histories by doing DNA tests. It's usually refuting them, to be honest. But autosomal DNA tests can help do that if it's like a close relationship oral history. So again, that 5 to 7 generations back. So the best practice when you're always using these tests is always to combine all sources of evidence and help develop the strongest conclusions, and try not to get pulled into the confirmation bias side of things. So strategies for using autosomal tests. This is just sort of a summary of what I recommend when you're doing these types of tests. Is first build a tree, even if it's a basic tree, to get the ground running. I mean, if you know your parents and your grandparents, that's great to start with. DNA, these DNA tests have much more meaning when you're able to know your own family tree and your match's family tree. So you'll need to sometimes work with your matches, or if they haven't supplied a family tree, reach out to them. Or if you think that their name's so unique, you might be able to find them through social media or so forth, and reach out that way. But what I do want to stress the most is to test your relatives, to try to build a genetic network. So getting a lot of those shared matches that you know are connected in a certain way, because they're through that genetic recombination, they're going to have different pieces of your ancestors in them than you yourself do. So they'll generate more interesting matches to compare. And it's when we start to compare these genetic clusters that we could start to really leverage the power of these tests with our genealogy. Always prioritize the oldest living relatives. So ever since I took my test in 2016, and then in 2017 through 2020, I took my great aunt's test. I took another great aunt on a different line's test. I took that very distant cousin who she descends from the daughter of my 4th great grandfather through his 4th marriage. So she's at that highest generational level. I'm actually always looking at their tests a lot more than I'm looking at mine for any new matches, because those are the ones that, you know, I'm fortunate enough to have, and those are the most powerful ones to really parse out how you know, we might be sharing DNA on some of these further back ancestors. Also, always try to target lines or relatives on specific branches of interest. So if you're interested in trying to break a brick wall on a 3rd great grandparent line, and you know some descendants from that 3rd great grandparent line, you don't know them, I should say, but you know of them through genealogical research, maybe try to approach some of them and ask them if they'd be willing to help out and test and see if they match, to help validate some of those lines, and maybe generate more matches beyond those 3rd great grandparents to further research. So I am done with my part. I don't know if Michael has more to add with any slides. If so, I can stop sharing.
I'll throw up some slides here.
Sure,
I'm
I'll
not
stop
going to
sharing.
turn my camera on for the moment. I'll turn it on when we do some Q&A, because I'm horribly nearsighted, so you'll be looking at my nose while I'm doing the presentation. So let me pull these up here. Oh. Who can share? Why am I getting? Okay, there we go. Sorry, I got a weird message.
We can see it.
Okay. Yeah, initially I got a message asking who could share. I'm like, wait, that's not my thing. Okay, I don't have a lot to add. I didn't really want to go to into the mechanics of autosomal DNA because I knew that Zach would cover that. So I just have a few things, and obviously, so Zach and I did not really have the time to compare slide sets. So we kind of put things together individually, but we hit on a lot of the same topics. So pretty much, I'm just going to emphasize some of the important things as well. So like Zach said, the random mixing of DNA over time, the further back you go in your genealogical research, the smaller the shared DNA becomes and the fewer matches you have. So we all share DNA with our first cousins, and we share enough DNA that you should match all of your first cousins. Second cousins, you still share big chunks of DNA, and you're getting different chunks from your shared great-grandparents, but you still have enough in common that you will usually share DNA with most all. There are exceptions to that rule, but most of the time you're going to match your second cousins. As we get further back in time, you can see third cousins, you're still going to get pretty good match quality. And this is any match. This is that you could share a tiny amount of DNA, but this is just the possibility that you will share DNA with this level of cousinhood. We see that as we get out to fourth, fifth, and sixth cousins, it really drops quickly. So you only share DNA with less than 2% of your sixth cousins. For me, if you look at my tree, these are, I'm going to move my little people screen. These are what, 2, 3, 4, 5, my 5 great-grandparents. On my tree, my 5 great-grandparents all were born between 1727 and 1805. So, I mean, in a genealogical time period, that's not that long ago, but I'm only going to share DNA with only 2% or less of these people. So we see that our matches, when we look at our autosomal DNA, drop quickly over time, like Zach had mentioned. Now, conversely, though, on an average, say we have 9 first cousins, you're going to match all of them. If you have 38 second cousins, and these are averages, these are not far flung, this is probably going to be fit for most of us. Since you're going to match most all of your second cousins, you're going to match 37 or 38 of them. We see that obviously as we go back in time, we have a lot more cousins. So even though you may only match 2% of your 6 cousins, you may have 23,506 cousins. So that indicates you'll have 470 matches. So you've got to play with the power of numbers here. So even though you will drop dramatically in the number of cousins you match over time, you will still have a pretty robust match list. But you have to, you have to look at your matches with a little bit of some critical thinking. So I just want to put this out there when, Zach says and I say, oh, you're going to match very few of your 6 cousins. And you say, well, I have found 6 cousin matches on there, so it's not that rare. No, it's not that rare because with the power of numbers, little percentages of big numbers still mean lots of people. It just means that it becomes more and more random the further back you go, and those the amount of DNA you match becomes smaller and smaller. Those have to be interpreted carefully, and I'm going to touch on that here in a moment. Oop. Oh, there we go. I didn't realize it was animated. This is important for me, and I'm glad Zach hit on it too. We really have to avoid confirmation bias. This is something I see over and over again when people are utilizing DNA to quote unquote prove lines. The definition of confirmation bias is the tendency to search for, interpret, favor, and recall information in a way that confirms one's pre-existing beliefs for a hypothesis. So in your mind, you've made your decision, and then you're just, cherry picking the DNA that fits your narrative. You can't do that. And I know as researchers, even the best of us want to do that because it's easy to do. So, just because you share an 8 centimorgan segment with someone else who has the same Daugherty ancestor as you That is not proof that that presumption is sound. You need to really back that up with good research and a lot of information. And much like Zach showed with the family tree DNA match list, is that, oh, he had a 19 centimorgan match with another Doherty. Well, that's got to be a Doherty relative, and he could have latched onto that and said, "Hey, it's a match. He's a Doherty. We must match on the Doherty line." And he's not found that match, but he was able to do a Y-DNA comparison, and no, it's not on his Doherty line, because that tester and himself statistically don't share a Doherty ancestry until 900, 1,000 years ago. So you can't find a match and claim it is proof. There's more to it than that. And even if you took a look at this scenario, like, oh, you found an 8 centimorgan match with someone who's got an ancestor in their line that's the same as in your line, so this must be proof that our tree is correct and sound. You really have to ignore small segments. And again, this is not the time or place to go into the definition of false segments, the definition, a deep dive on definition of inheritance by state or inheritance by descent. The bottom line is that small segments can be overinterpreted, and small segments are often false. The breaking point, really, where 50-50, where half your match, half these small segments are true matches and half of them are not, really kind of hovers at 10 centimorgans. But you want a better than 50-50 chance, right? You want to make sure that you're working with segments that are meaningful. 10 really is my lowest threshold to chase. But even then, I tend to ignore most of them. Zach said, like, he's not going to look at any under 20. That's a good guideline. I guess for our lecture today is, don't find a 6 or 8 centimorgan match and stake your life on the conclusion that this match is meaningful. There's way more that goes into small segments, and many genetic genealogists, including Blaine Bettinger, will tell you you just have to ignore them. You just have to throw them out. They have no meaning. There's no way to determine whether they're true or false. So if you look at a tiny match and see you both have the same ancestor in your trees and claim that as proof, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. And I know you want it to work, but that's confirmation bias, taking something, one piece of information, and claiming that it is proof. It doesn't work that way. And even if you look, here's a study with a 20 centimorgan segment. This is from Borland Genetics, and they have a really nice blog. Here is a 20 centimorgan autosomal segment. If you look at this pie chart, if you share a 20 centimorgan segment with someone else, usually you have an ancestor within the last 100 years. Or, probably a little more than 75% of your matches at a 20 centimorgan segment could be within the last 200 years. That's something that's genealogically workable, right? Like you pretty much, if you've got complete trees, many of your lines you have back, 200 years. Maybe even 300 years. I mean, you're really pushing it there to get all your lines back that far. But look, you've got a small segment of people who share a 20 centimorgan match where their common ancestor was over 500 years ago. So yes, statistically, a 20 centimorgan match is a great one to chase, but it may never pan out. And you may just be beating your head against a wall saying, that's a big segment. I should be able to find the connection. And Zach even just showed you an example of a 19 centimorgan match he had with another Doherty. He was able, if he fell into a confirmation bias mindset, he would have said, that's my Doherty ancestor. He would have, latched onto someone else's tree and got it all wrong. But he was able to compare Y-DNA, which, when you've got the ability to prove or disprove a connection with Y or Y or mitochondrial DNA, do it. But he was able to show through a Y-DNA assessment that it wasn't a Doherty connection, way too far back to be a Doherty connection. So it must have been a connection on another side of his dad's ancestry, but he couldn't find it. And it's either because the other person doesn't have a complete tree, the other person has errors in their tree, or it's a 19 centimorgan segment that's too far back. So yes, I will chase a 20 centimorgan segment, but if I just can't find the connection, there are reasons for that. It may just be a large segment that has clung together over many generations. So doing autosomal DNA research is playing a numbers game, but it's a numbers game that's not always definitive or reliable. There are always exceptions to the rule. You know what they say in genealogy, never say never and never say always, because you're always going to be proven wrong. So even a sizable segment can be further back than we think. So, but the overarching message here is don't get hung up on small segments. Don't give them more meaning than they deserve. There may be ways to interpret small-ish segments, and I'll show you that in a second. Okay. And I just have like maybe 10 slides here. So a lot of it is kind of just reiterating what Zack has said, and we're going to open it up for questions. So Zack talked about testing the people that are more beneficial to your ancestry. Yes, testing someone who is the oldest person in the line of interest is definitely worthwhile. Definitely. I'm an old man, and I still was able to test 2 of my grandparents. Luckily, I had 2 grandparents live into their 90s, so I was able to test them. Unfortunately, I tested one at 23andMe, and then she died right as Ancestry came online, and so I was not able to get her on Ancestry. But I have tested her. But you test people who are oldest in your line. Not all of us are lucky enough to have aged half great aunts. Was 3 greats, 2 greats on Zack's side. But what Zack showed you is he was able to go back and test someone living today whose great grandfather was the same as Zack's great grandfather. So that's gold. You want to find those people who carry the DNA of interest to your research. And that's, you'll see me bring up in one of the next slides. The important way to use DNA, autosomal DNA, is as an active tool, not necessarily a passive tool. Don't test yourself and wait for the matches to come. Test the people who have the most worth to your research. Now, I tested a half first cousin, he's younger than me. And you're like, well, that's not testing the oldest person in your line. Why did you test him? Well, half relatives are really interesting because my half first cousin, we share the same paternal grandmother. This is the grandmother I tested before. I should say she was still alive when Ancestry came online, but I tested her at Ancestry. Her test failed. So by the time I got a new kit, she had died. So I tried. But we share the same paternal grandmother. Your first cousins, remember, your first cousins share the same grandparents. So sometimes you test a first cousin, you've got 2 lines that they could share DNA with, your grandfather, your grandmother. A half first cousin only shares DNA. In this case, my half first cousin only shares DNA with my grandmother. So I want to show you just an example of how you can use shared matches. Where's my little, I'm trying moving my little, my people bar around and it keeps getting in my way. So shared matches. So this is what they look like on Ancestry, and most of you are probably using Ancestry. Your shared matches, they're also called matches in common. It is really important to use your shared matches because your shared matches is your roadmap. That's your roadmap. Now, I know that if I look at the shared matches between me and my half first cousin, they should all match along my grandmother's line, right? So your shared matches can be your roadmap to understanding your unknown matches. I always tell people, let your known give the unknown meaning. So I know that any matches I have in common with my half first cousin have to share ancestors on my grandmother's side. Well, of course, I've tested my brother and my uncle and my aunt. And of course, my uncle and my aunt are my grandmother's children. My father had died, so I wasn't able to test my father on Ancestry, but I was able to test my aunt and uncle. Of course, they match on this line because they're my grandmother's grandchild, and children. But who are these people? Well, you can do two things when you're looking at shared matches. One, you can look at the how much DNA they share, because here you've got the centimorgans. Now, Ancestry and many of the other sites will give you an estimation of who they are. They'll say, oh, this must be a half first cousin. This must be a first cousin 3 times removed. Look at those, but don't rely on those. And I see a lot of people who are posting on like social media or Facebook groups and like, oh, it says it's my half first cousin, but it's not, because I know all my half first cousins. Like, why is it telling me, is this someone I should know? Well, that's an estimation. And Zach had mentioned in passing on one of his slides, you share 50% of your DNA with your parents, your children, or your siblings. Now, you should know who your parents, children, and siblings are, but like Ancestry will look at known ages if it's in your profile. Like if you're 34 and you have a 50% match with someone who's 36, well, they're going to guess that's a sibling because it's not your child and it's not your parents. As you go further out with aunts, uncles, grandparents, grandchildren, first cousins, and as you get further out, there are multiple relationships that share the same amount or roughly the same amount of shared DNA. So it's going to get fuzzier over time. And Ancestry is going to guess who they are, but they may not be right. Now, say I've just started testing my half first cousin tests. I use my shared matches, and all these shared matches, we should share ancestry along my grandmother's line. And if I do research, these people who I didn't test, who tested on their own, oops, it didn't advance. So once I was able to kind of do my research and figure out who they are, this is another half first cousin. Actually, 2 more half first cousins. I need to get rid of this. There we go. My little people bar keeps going up and down and side to side, and everywhere I move it, it's in my way. So these are 2 other half first cousins. This is a first cousin 3 times removed. This is a second cousin once removed. Now I can't remember if I actually went in and changed, because they'll give you suggestions, but you can go into that profile and you can actually lock it in. Once you know who they are, you can lock it in. And I don't know if I locked this one in or that was a guess, but it was right. But here's one where I obviously didn't lock it in because it says, oh, this must be a third cousin or a half second cousin once removed. And it's not, it's a second cousin once removed. And so, this guess was not right. It was close, but it wasn't right. And so, but these are all people that once I figure out who they are, yes, we share relatives along my grandmother's line. So your shared matches are important. Your shared matches are your roadmap. And when you test other people, like you test your aunts and uncles or you test your half first cousins, your shared matches take a known relationship and help you make meaning of the unknown relationships. I hope that makes sense. I really didn't want to import a bunch of trees and show you how they were related, but these are all half first cousins by my grandmother, and these are first cousin once removed, 3 times removed, and second cousin once removed of the same person. This woman didn't know who she was until I did a little research, and her maiden name is Rootsatz. I know who she is now. And this person is a first cousin 3 times removed on my grandmother's mother's father's line. So I was able to figure it out, but it let me know where to focus my attention by using my shared matches. So shared matches are your roadmap. Utilize them. But if your shared matches, you're comparing yourself to maybe someone else you've tested, or you're comparing yourself to someone else who has tested under their own power, but you know who they are, so you can start doing shared matches to help give the other ones meaning. Now, Zach showed you a diagram of this. This is Blaine Bettinger's shared centimorgan chart. It is also found on DNApainter.com. It's the same chart that Zach showed you. So say once I figure out who these people are, I probably want to go and see, does it fit where I think they are. So here's like the half first cousin I tested, he shared 405. This half first cousin shared 564. This half first cousin shared 213. That's a big difference, right? But do they all fit with half first cousins? Half first cousins average is going to be 449, but in a user submitted database where Blaine has used thousands and thousands of user submitted data point levels, a half first cousin roughly 449. That's the average. I don't know if it's the average or the mean. It might be the mean. But it can share anywhere between 156 and 979. And these, even though they're varied, they fall within that frame. And so they fit with where I think they do. A first cousin 3 times removed. This one shares 119. Let's go over here. First cousin 3 times removed. Is it on here? There it is. 117 is the average with a very wide range. 117, what did I say she was? 119? Yeah, so we're right in that average. Mother Nature likes averages, but Mother Nature falls within a bell curve. That's what this illustrates. And as you get out to, 5th cousins, 6th cousins, I showed you that you will match a lot of your 5th and 6th cousins because there are a lot of them out there. But the range is, in this situation, 0 to 71, with an average of 18. Guess what? You're going to share a lot of zeros with your 6 cousins because you don't share enough DNA with your 6 cousins. Of course, your zeros don't show up. The zeros are the ones that don't match. So even this is a little skewed because these are people reporting. I know a 6th cousin tested and we don't share DNA, but oftentimes it's skewed because the people who submitted this data are from their match list. So, a lot of your 6 cousins don't show up. There's a lot of zeros here as you get out to 3rd and 4th cousins. So, even I showed you in your 3rd cousin range, you don't share a lot of your DNA with 3rd cousins. And so it gets really iffy in this, even 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th cousins. Some will show up by the power of big numbers. Small percentages of big numbers still mean they'll show up in your match list, but many of them do not. And so the ranges are incredibly variable. So this is pretty reliable. Say you test unknown 2nd cousins. You know darn well it's a 2nd cousin, but say, you test him and he shares only 39 centimorgans, and that's low. And it's even out of this referenced bell curve. So, you either really need to reevaluate your DNA, evaluate those persons' matches to other people are related, and see if he really does fall into a 2nd cousin range. If he does, he just happens to be low on that bell curve, even lower than Blaine identified, but he's still a 2nd cousin. If you're falling significantly out of these averages, I'm afraid that you may find there's an error in someone's known genealogy, which means it may be a half relationship because there's a quote unquote non-paternal event. Someone is not related to who they think they are. So if you fall out of these reference ranges consistently, you've got a problem in your tree. So these are here for a reason. Use them. I guess I would say don't get super hung up on them, but do get hung up on them if none of them are fitting where you think they fit. So, my words of wisdom at the end here were pretty much things that Zack had already mentioned. Ancestry through lines is helpful, but is not gospel truth. I need to really emphasize this. Ancestry uses your DNA matches and then pairs them with people's published trees. I can tell you my Daugherty line is repeatedly misrepresented on online trees. Over and over and over again, links to people that don't exist, people that have been proven wrong. But because they're in so many trees, and you've all seen it, the cut and paste mentality where a known error gets copied to 500 trees. Well, if 500 trees have that error in it and you're related to a good chunk of them, that error will show up in your through lines. And this is important for many people who have colonial American genealogy where research is more difficult. and records are more sparse, and people are just throwing things into trees that don't have proof, through lines will reflect that connection. It'll reflect a false connection. So through lines is not gospel truth. Use it. It's a great clue. It is not always correct. You are not genetically related to all your ancestors. As you get back to your third great grandparents, fourth great grandparents, fifth great grandparents, because of the random inheritance of DNA inheritance, you may have lost DNA of many of your distantly related ancestors. So even when you go back to your grandparents, your grandparents, you have 4 grandparents, and so you are 25% of each on your family tree, but you are not necessarily 25% of your grandparents via DNA. You're close. Again, Mother Nature likes averages, but you may be. I've tested 2 of my grandparents, and so of course by reference, because I tested a paternal grandmother and a maternal grandfather. So I know that my parents were 50-50 of their parents. And so I think my breakdown for my 4 my 4 grandparents is like 29, 21, 27, 23. So they're not all 25, 25, 25, 25. It gets more ragged as you get back to each generation. So if you get far back, you may not be related to your some of your ancestors, and that will be important when you're testing other relatives or you're testing other people or comparing your match list. Keep in mind that there are many types of relationships that share the same amount of matching DNA, and I already mentioned that. 25% grandparent, grandchild, half siblings, first cousins. And so although Ancestry or some of the other sites will guess at what that relationship is, it may not be right. Also, this can be complicated by multiple ancestral relationships. Those of you who live in Ireland or have recent Irish Daugherty ancestry, and you have like 6 of your 8 great grandparents are Daughertys, you're going to get really thrown on this. Because if your Daughertys are related to Daughertys are related to Daughertys, your matching DNA is going to rise, and it's going to really, you can't use Blaine's matching DNA list because it's going to get you messed up. Endogamy that includes communities that have intermarried within generations, like Jewish people share higher numbers of DNA or higher amounts of DNA with other Jewish people because the Jews have been intermarrying for centuries. And even though you may not find a relationship in a genealogical time frame, you may still share DNA. Those people you do share DNA with may be, that number may be falsely elevated. Endogamy, that's like Jewish people, that's like the Acadians in Canada and Louisiana, but and then also though pedigree collapse, like people who have multiple ancestors that are shared, or like the Daughertys in Northern Ireland, or for me, I have an Italian last name. On my Italian great grandfather, he comes from a small rural community in southern Italy where they intermarry within the same families for generations. So it's going to get thrown off. So numbers can be thrown off for multiple reasons. Comparing matches needs context. If someone only has their mother's tree filled out and you have a match on that line and they don't have anything on their father's tree, you cannot with confidence say that the same 2 people in the trees are where you got the matching DNA. Complete trees need to be compared to complete trees. Without complete trees, you either need to complete them for the person, take what trees that they have put on there and work them on your own. But you can't say that a match is on a certain ancestor if a complete tree is not compared to a complete tree. If you don't find a match, maybe you need to look at geographical similarities. Do you have ancestors that come from the same county in Pennsylvania in the 1800s? Maybe that match will help you find the connection. I mentioned also use DNA as an active tool by testing the important people for your research, much like Zach had shown you. Don't just test yourself and wait for the matches to occur. As an example, even testing my brother. So I think I told you I share 21% of my DNA with my my paternal grandmother. So she's of my grandparents, she's the one I share the least amount of DNA with of all four of my grandparents. My brother shares more of my paternal grandmother's DNA. So if I want to look at matches to my paternal grandmother, I look at his test, not my test. He is a better living person today who is a better test subject for my paternal grandmother than I am. So it can be as recent as that sometimes testing your siblings or your cousins or your aunts and uncles will give you a better test subject for various lines. Use your shared match list like I showed you. That's going to be your roadmap to give your matches meaning. But as Zach wrapped up with, you cannot use DNA alone to find your ancestors. You can't just play on your match list and go, oh, look, there's a Daugherty. That's a relative. I'm going to hook onto their family tree and I'm going to publish it. You need to look at your matches and pair it with good research. You need to look at your matches and see how much DNA you share, what names are in the tree, how complete is their tree, can you back it up with research evidence? Do you have shared matches that seem to bolster that connection? You have to marry good research with DNA. You cannot do one without the other. You can't make conclusions with one without the other. If you're just using your DNA match list to flesh out a tree, you're doing it wrong. You really need to be a good researcher and give those DNA matches meaning. So most of what I wanted to contribute was to bolster what Zach had already said. So that's all I have to share. And I'm going to turn on my,
Let us see your face.
I know, white view profile, mute audio, blur background.
Should be able to.
Why do I not have a, I lost my, turn my camera on.
Well, if you, yeah, usually what happens is I lose that when I've been doing sharing my screen, but it should show up in your
That's
menu.
weird. There it goes.
Yeah.
It was on the, wasn't on my menu, but it was in my lower left corner. So who the heck knows?
I know. Well,
so
this is great. And you and Zach did a wonderful presentation. We didn't get any questions in the chat, but maybe now people could.
There's something I would like to also add.
Oh, great.
Well, it's going to be with actually with Bob, who was holding up his hand. But he ends up coincidentally being my family, my whole family group's closest Y-DNA matches to him and his family. Since we've done the most exhaustive levels, like the big Y700, I did it for multiple people through each son of my brick wall ancestor, and he had done it for himself and his brother. We're able to determine an approximate range of when we have this unknown patrilineal Daugherty ancestor, and it could be as far back as the mid to late 1500s, but definitely decent possibility it's in the 1600s. And with that, I asked him, hey, would you mind sharing your ancestry DNA test? You could invite people to be able to see their match lists and so forth to help work with research. He did that to me with me long ago, and so did another close Big Y tester to us that we can't figure out a connection, that they have recent Irish ancestry. They shared their DNA, autosomal DNA test with me. And believe it or not, there's hardly any shared matches we have in combination with each other. And through the Y-DNA, I know we are related, definitely since the 1500s, you know, but like hardly anything that's shared matches. And if they are, they're so few and they're so small on the centimorgans that I can't parse them out, because I know that those interesting individuals that we both share, there's no way, it's beyond my brick wall, it's beyond their brick wall. It's really hard to
and it's like the Charles Daugherty I have one of your chart. There's 7 different Charles Daughertys
Mhm.
related members, and one of them I'm a 2-step difference with.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
you, who's related to that Charles Daugherty, were what, 6, 7?
Yeah, I was 5 steps difference from him or something, but
Yeah.
I even tested him at Ancestry or had him tested Ancestry. He's since passed away, unfortunately, but his Ancestry test does not match you, at
Right.
Ancestry. But
But
he's a
but
2-step difference, so that's just goes to show that although it could be really close on yDNA, it still could be wash out too fast. Those generational drop-offs just happen really quick
right.
with.
Yeah, and of course with autosomal DNA, I mean, like we're just kind of brushing on some basics in an hour plus time, and you could do like full 1 week institutes on this and still not go into the power of autosomal DNA. But like Zach and Bob were just talking about, like if you've got the ability to do Y or mitochondrial to bolster a hypothesis, that's fantastic. I have a mitochondrial DNA study that proved a lineage on a 18th century Pennsylvania family. And all the people that showed up to be matches that proved my case, none of them share autosomal DNA. And so that's taking it back to the 18th century. And so the washout over many generations, your autosomal DNA disappears. So autosomal DNA certainly has power and benefit, but it's, as you get out to third cousins, fourth cousins, fifth cousins, they wash away. And so if you've got other ways of using DNA to like with mitochondrial Y, then use it. And then of course, I guess I'm doing a plug, but I don't get any perks for it. Legacy Family Tree does maintain a lecture catalog, and I can't remember how much you pay a year to be a member of that.
50.
Yeah, it's pretty reasonable for the thousands of DNA lectures, well, genealogy lectures, period, they have in their library. But Legacy Family Tree, Legacy Family Tree webinars. If you want to do a deeper dive into DNA, they have wonderful selections, so you can learn a lot through them.
Well, Mike, you mentioned the word context, and that brought back to me. My mom passed away when I was 12, and my 86-year-old grandmother, Molly Daugherty, nee Sullivan, came to help my dad raise me and my brother. And I sat down with her and tried to figure out why we used to have these family reunions, 300 cousins. And I asked her, well, how am I related? How come she calls him, uncle, and I call him Jim? Well, he's not your uncle. He's her uncle, but she's your cousin. And so the next family reunion, I asked everybody to bring a list of all their children and how many people they remember going back. And we had a wall chart and of 9 brothers and sisters on the Walsh family tree. My grandmother, Molly, was one of 10 children on the Sullivan tree. And we had a Jinks family, Jinks, from County Sligo. And we had another branch like that. So, and my grandmother knew the names of all my grandparents, my great grandparents. And so I had all these names. So I had this context so that when I started getting in, in 1986, I got a family tree set of discs, and I entered it in. And when I first entered my family tree, I had over 1,000 names of people. So that gave me context to go for when I finally got into yDNA, when I was talking to Mike Anthony Daugherty, whose kit number is a 4-digit 8373. That tells you how he was one of the first ones in yDNA. And it was 2004 when the Daugherty surname group actually took off. He and John B. Daugherty, who's also there in 2004. And then 2005, I went to the first Daugherty reunion, and I met Pasquale O'Dougherty, Dogherty. And I said, that's my great grandfather from Canada spelled it Dogherty. I thought it was a misspelling. And here you have the same spelling. And it turns out that the Daughertys were descendants, Pasquale supposedly is descended from John Daugherty, brother of Caher, who had the, discretion's a better, tactic to take when your brother just had his head, taken off and hung on a pike outside Dublin Castle. And he went to go hide in Galbally in County Cavan, which is where my grandmother, Molly Daugherty Sullivan, was from, Galbally in County Cavan. And oh boy, this is connections. You try to get these things in context. Some of them make sense, but I managed my brother and my two sisters' DNA, and we have my brother and I Y-DNA are exact matches, but on the autosomal DNA, it shows a great difference, not a great, but a significant difference between him and I and my brothers and my sisters as well. But one day I got a call from somebody or an email through Ancestry about a match that her husband had to both of my sisters. And I said, well, if you match both of my sisters, wouldn't you match me? Because, we're the same. But as you were talking earlier about how you don't inherit the exact same 50% from your parents, the deck gets shuffled in between. And each of us, my brother and sisters, were all 4 years apart, so that also adds to that. But anyway, what you're talking about really makes a lot of sense. You have to go into this with caution. You can't accept.
Well, the
these
interesting
parents.
thing is like it, and Zach can attest to this too, is that doing DNA analysis to prove and disprove lines and to find leads can become an expensive hobby because yes, even as something as simple as my brother shares different DNA matches than I do, some more important for different lines. So you test your siblings and you test your parents and you test your aunts and your uncles, and these are all very important ways to find meaningful matches. But it just shows that you're right that our DNA does get shuffled, and people have shared different DNA with the different grandparents and great grandparents and great great grandparents. So the more you work with your shared matches and the more people you test who you do know are related, the more power you have in making those connections, most definitely. But Kathleen, you have had your hand raised for a while. So what?
Well, and there is a question in the chat too. I don't
I
know.
saw that
was
too.
a
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, Debbie
Debbie's
is
got a
asking.
question.
Yeah, she's asking about privacy and what happens with your DNA. I don't know if you guys would want to talk about that. She was saying, does it mean anybody can see your DNA if you shared it on Ancestry? So do you want to talk
No,
about
so
what's actually shared? Yeah.
yeah, so on Ancestry, so if you actually share your results with someone, or like someone asks, can you share your DNA results with me? They have no power over your. They can't download your raw data. They can't look at anything. Sharing your DNA with someone only means they can see your matches. So, and Ancestry does take their DNA privacy very seriously. So they do have fairly tight control over that. There's, of course, the big discussion as of the last few years is people using DNA databases to identify Jane and John Does, to identify murder suspects by using DNA from crime scenes, and so even though DNA has been around now for over a decade, we're still in a little bit of a wild west on regulation as far as what law enforcement can use for our DNA. And there are some databases open to law enforcement, like law enforcement, like GEDmatch. You can choose to share or not share. But Ancestry is pretty tight. I have no problem sharing my DNA with people, and I've asked people to share with me. I understand the concern, most definitely, but I would consider it maximally safe. I mean, Zach can give his opinion on that as well. But yeah, when you're sharing, you're not sharing your DNA. You're just sharing your match list, essentially.
Right. I've had a number of people, like, again, going back to Bob and stuff, that if they invited me to view their match list. So anytime I go into Ancestry now, I could go to DNA and I could toggle a little drop down menu and choose his kit, and by doing that I'm seeing his batch list, you know, and then I could use that for research. Uh, and I think I have like 60 or 70 kits tied into my Ancestry account. So some of that are those are people that I target tested, and some are just people I asked, and they invited me to view it. So yeah.
Yeah. For example, like when I showed you the the comparison, like using your match list for my half first cousin. Like my half first cousin tested of his own accord. He just popped up on my match list, and I know him. And I was like, "Hey, can you share your test with me so I can look at your matches, even though we share the same grandmother? We're going to have different matches. Our match list is going to be different because we got different DNA from that grandmother. And actually, that's the grandmother I share the least amount of DNA with any of my grandparents at 21%. So, if I want to look at matches to my grandmother, I'll look at his test. Actually, if I want to look at matches to my grandmother, I'll look at my aunt and uncle's kits because they're the children of my grandmother. And so, like Zach said, like he's tested so many people in his family, and same here. He doesn't look at his own test kit. I don't even look at my own test kit because I've tested aunts and uncles and cousins. Like so I'm working on the Daugherty line. I did test my Daugherty grandfather, and so I'm not going to look at my match list for Daugherty clues. I'm going to look at my grandfather's because I got my DNA from him, and so I got but I only share 29% of my DNA with him. He shares 100% of his DNA with himself, and if I'm going to look at my Daugherty connections, I'm going to look at his test. I'm not going to look at mine. And that shows the power of testing the people that have the most meaning. If you're a Daugherty and your mother's not, and your father's living, test him. If your grandfather's living, test him. If your grandfather's not living, but his sibling is living, test him or her. And that's like what Zach showed you. He was able to test people further and further back in his Daugherty line who were still living. And even when he got back to, this half this
Second
connection,
cousin, third removed.
second cousin 3 times removed, like he doesn't know that person, but that's a person who is important to his research because she shared far more DNA with his common Daugherty ancestor, so he's able to contact her and set the stage and get her to test. And so yeah, use your DNA testing as an active tool. Find the people that hold the answers and see if they'll test for you. Or if you happen to stumble on them in your match list, see if they'll share their DNA with you. But sharing on Ancestry is very safe. I have no problem with that. You're just sharing your match list. If you have issues with law enforcement using your DNA, GEDmatch is a public public system you can dump your DNA into. GEDmatch is important because you can dump your information there. You can dump your DNA results in there. So maybe your ancestry test can be compared to people who have a 23andMe test, who have a family tree DNA test. So you're able to compare your DNA to other people who have put their database or their DNA in there from multiple databases. You can opt in or opt out into law enforcement utilization, but it becomes more of a public profile and becomes a ever growing gray area. So it is a concern. It's a valid concern. But yeah, when you share an ancestry, you're just sharing your match list. It is perfectly safe. You're not giving away a piece of yourself.
And they did come out with a tool recently, but you have to pay for it, unfortunately, called the Pro Tools for DNA. And it enhances the shared match list to where you could see how much DNA they share with the shared matches and with you. I'm probably butchering on how I'm trying to explain this, but
it's a hard concept to explain.
But what's nice about that is, like, I'm looking at this individual, I'm seeing the shared matches, and then there's a way of toggling, like, show their highest level of their closest matches that you also share. So then you're able to kind of branch out from them and build a cluster around them that you and your matches share and so forth. So it kind of helps get around being able to ask those people for them to share your match list in some ways. But unfortunately,
the
sorry.
Pro Tools is like an extra $10 a month.
Yeah.
So yeah, the Pro Tools, I mean, so, and I cut that off because I do have the Pro Tools. When I showed you that screenshot of my half first cousin's match list, and I showed you how to use your shared matches. Oh, shared matches are powerful. That's where you're going to find where connections lie. But yeah, with the Pro Tools, you can then see how your shared matches have matches. And so it is, if you really want to go down a rabbit hole that'll keep you busy for hours, looking at shared matches of shared matches of shared matches of shared matches, and you can build this bigger database. And so as you, and like I always say, use your known to give the unknown meaning. Like if you have this cluster of shared matches and you all share along a Doherty line, and then here you've got some random match, you don't know who they are, but everyone seems to, they fall into this cluster of shared matches, you know they've got to be along your Doherty line. So you're using your shared matches will help you give those unknowns meaning. But yes, with the Pro Tools, you can then work with your shared matches of shared matches. And so they are powerful, but you will waste a lot of time. Trust me, my house does not stay clean because I'm too busy playing on my on matches of matches of matches of matches. But that's where the power of the DNA databases lie.
Well, and building out your tree so that when you come up with some of those matches of matches, then you can find them on your tree based on the other research you've done.
And yeah, and granted, like many of those matches you're gonna find and you're gonna pull up their tree and they don't have a tree, they have just like one parent listed. Now sometimes, you know, if maybe they just have their grandparents listed, well, they've given you a template for you to then you may have to be doing the research of your matches to find out how they fit. And so, you know, if you seem to have a really good match that may help you with your genealogy, but they don't have a complete tree, you may have to complete it for them. Or in situations for me, my Doherty line goes back to the 18th century, colonial America, and many trees online connect my line to a fictitious line that constantly gets, you know, thrown out there, and I'll find trees that go back to this fictitious individual, and I have to break that connection and fix their tree for myself to see how they fit. And so, even though you may find some of the complete tree, doesn't mean it's right. So if you find a connection that looks good and the tree doesn't match, then you may have to kind of redo your research or their research.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's why one of the reasons why we were trying to work so hard with our study, our Y-DNA study group, so that we can help confirm or deny, you know, with science, these
Yeah.
trees that aren't necessarily accurate. So
And yeah, so I mean, it's worth saying, and you know, that obviously since this lecture day is being sponsored by a surname study, like Doherty study, that's where y-DNA is very important for our group, because one, the surname is so common in Ireland and derives from so many ancient lines. So y-DNA has got enormous amount of power for our group. But we may find with y-DNA studies, like with Big Y700, that maybe you do have a connection with someone circa 1450 AD. That's great, but it's, you know, autosomal DNA probably is not going to help you with that. But that's why you're using y-DNA. Like just because I'm a Doherty, you're a Doherty, he's a Doherty, doesn't mean that we're all related within a genealogical time frame. Y-DNA can parse that out. Autosomal DNA is more helpful for those who are more closely related in time.
yeah,
But, you know, I had an example here where I got an email from somebody who said, "You're showing up as my closest match, and yet I'm not Irish." And I said, "Well, what? Give me some more details." And he said, "Well, my grandmother said that we had a border in the family from Ireland, and he thinks the last name was Gilroy." And I said, "Well, what time period are you talking about? Because it sounded like that this border got the daughter pregnant and then went off to America." And uh, I said, "Well, the Gilroys in my family had already left from Ireland, so it couldn't be that connection." So a month or so later, he connects back with me in an email and says, no, it wasn't Gilroy, it was Gilmore. I said, oh, wait a minute. That time frame does match up. And it turns out that there was a Gilmore who was over in England before he went to America and connected that way. So it was, it wasn't a police search. It was just, well, how am I related to you? Well, that's because I'm related to the Gilmores, and that's how you're related to me, because there's Gilmore in your DNA.
Well, yeah, and it's worth saying that, like, anytime we ask people to test, and anytime we get requests for matches, um, you may get requests for matches where it turns out that there is an error in their tree because someone's daddy's not their daddy, or you may ask someone to test and find out that, oops, you just asked someone to test because they're your second cousin, and turns out you don't share DNA because you just unearthed or dragged a skeleton out of someone's family closet. Um, that will happen. It will happen more often than you would like. And when you ask people to test, you have to, I mean, I know Blaine Bettinger will actually have people sign like a release, almost like, you're testing for me, but these are the risks, blah, blah, blah.
He's a
Because
lawyer, so.
he's a lawyer, yeah. So I do, and when I ask cousins to test, like, if you test, remember that DNA can unearth secrets that we don't know about, and it may turn out that you're not related, because you think you are, but we have problems in our family tree, and it happens. So tread with care. Give people, you have to tell people that, and people be like, oh no, that's fine, I get it. But then, because it'll never happen to me, but it does. So that is a word of caution.
So Debbie has put a question into the chat, again, wondering, she said her Doherty ancestor is her direct bloodline. However, she has another grandmother that was adopted out of an orphanage. Will DNA testing help me with the research for an adoptive grandparent for her parents?
Very much so. So, and I do a lot of work with that, for client work, and I've done it with my own family. If you've got an adopted grandmother, now, of course, you know who your grandmother is. Like, you could start testing all of her, whatever, if there are any children left, but any grandchildren, start making a database of the descendants of that adopted grandmother, and then start working with those matches. You will eventually find clusters that, that will lead you to clues towards parentage. It can be done. It's a deep dive. That's still within a recent time frame that it is very doable, and the ancestry databases are big enough that you can do that. Um, it's not the time or place to try to go into like all the details on how to do that. But yes, it's very doable. But you have to build, like I always say, use your known to give the unknown meaning. You don't know who her parents are, but you know who her children and grandchildren are. Test all them, and then you're going to find these clusters emerge of matches, DNA matches, that will lead you to her biological family. It's very doable.
Yeah.
It'll take work.
Absolutely. Yeah, and like you said, there are people such as yourself and others who do that work. You can hire different people to help you with that too if you find it difficult. So, yeah. So, any other questions or comments here?
Yeah, just one other comment. You mentioned
Sure.
about testing your grandparents. There was a case, and this was a few years back, where somebody was the grandson of one of the early presidents of the United States. I don't know if it was Tyler or whatever, but he had a son when he was 70, and that son had a son when he was 70. So here you had, 200 years span with just 3 generations.
Yeah, I think, didn't John Tyler's last grandson just die? So he still had living grandchildren up until very recently.
That's
So
crazy.
yeah, so and well, and Zach, you just proved that. Like, those are great lines to find. If you can find an old ancestor who had like 4 wives and fathered his last child when he was in his 70s or 80s, then those are great lines to start chasing for DNA testing. I have an ancestor who had 20 children. He had 12 by his first wife and 8 by his second wife. And his last child was born when his eldest child was 63. So
Wow.
he fathered his last child in his 80s. And again, obviously, biologically, men can reproduce until the day they die. But and you just think like, really? And
Yeah.
yeah, DNA, I think he was 84 when he fathered his last child, and it holds up with DNA. So yeah, those are great people to test because you then, bridge an enormous time span with very little change in with very little shuffling. The shuffling we talk about that make it so random. If you've got someone who's of a generation multiple times removed who's still living, chase that person and beg for their spit.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I don't necessarily see any other uh, questions. Nobody else has their hand up at this point.
Well, Eve,
Yeah.
I have a question for you. I noticed that you have like 20 something hits that don't have any, is there some project coming up with those?
Oh, it's the
I-
blank kits that you ordered.
I ordered 30 kits.
Yeah.
Yes, Bob. And we're going to talk about who we're going to try to see get tested for that. We did get a donation to our project, and so we're able to buy kits, and we were going to do them at a lower level to begin with, and then try to see about getting some more donations to see which ones we want to test, then upgrade the test to the Y7. Is it called the Y700 now? What's it called,
Yeah.
Zach? Yeah.
Big Y, yeah, big Y 700.
Yeah. So that will be helpful with those kits, but it's really wonderful when people make these donations
Yeah.
through through our website, through the project stuff too. You can donate either ways, but we are a nonprofit in the United States, so people do get a tax deduction for making a donation. So that's my plug.
Yeah. Well, it'd be great if we could get some connections back to the old sod, so to speak.
Yeah, I think what we're hoping to do is use some of the tests for early colonial lines to add to that a little bit as part of our project, as well as there are some Dohertys that I've been talking to, male Dohertys over in Ireland. And there's a couple of specific families that have agreed to. So we're, yeah, we're excited.
Yeah. Sounds great.
Yeah. So not everybody saw that because you're still in admin. You were seeing the emails going back and forth. First, Zach said to me, "What's this about?" And I said, "It's those kits I've been trying to
Yeah,
get."
as an admin, I get an email and it's like 30 new project members all at the same time. I'm like, that's weird. And then
Yeah.
it's because she ordered a bunch of blank kits for taking over to Ireland in November and stuff. So
Yeah, and I tried to get them to begin in February, wasn't it, Zach?
Yeah.
We've been trying for a while to get these. So
yeah, Family Tree will actually if you ask as an administrator will offer to send you blank kits. So they're not really paid, like they're not already big Y tests that we just got to swab, send it in, and it's paid for. So they're blank kits. They still cost money to get them and ship them, but then
Right.
we're able to swab someone if someone agrees, and then we could send it in, then we could pay for the testing of it. So it's a cool thing that they offer. I've heard that they did that, and we finally got them to send us out some. So
that could open up a lot of connections.
mhm.
yeah, we're hoping to. Yeah. So, all right. Well, thanks everybody, and we will get this posted on our YouTube channel. I today have to go to a grandson's football game now. He's in 7th grade, so Granny has to be there. So I'll get it uploaded later today or tomorrow, as I have time to do that. I'm so grateful, both Mike and Zach, for your willingness to present this. I know you're on our board, so we sometimes do a little bit of arm twisting with each other to to get these presentations. But I learned something, and I'm sure that everyone else did too. So thank you very much, and we will see you guys. Oh, just to let everyone know that our newsletter is going to come out in the next week or so, and we have announcement about our next in-person gathering in Ireland next summer. So be sure and look for that. Contact us if you have any questions about it. And I'm glad we're able to do this today. Thanks, everybody.
Right.
Bye.
See you later.
Bye.